General Alexander, thank you so much for being here. And for those who are curious, as you were standing on the side of the stage, you were like, I have one more grandchild. You have 16?
Yeah, because it's 2 to the 4th. You have to mathematically get these correct. And I'm the 16th director, which is also 2 to the 4th, so we had to match those up. And it's taken 8+ years. That's actually why I stayed there. We only had 3 or 4 grandchildren when I came in. I said, well, we got to fix this.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We've asked this question to everybody today, and you're not going to escape it either, and that's about grandchildren and the government shutdown. You know, we just heard from Chairman Rogers that some of the critical intelligence workers have been brought back at the DoD and some other places as well. But talk about what the shutdown has done to the cybersecurity mission across the government.
Well, I think the most damage is to the morale of the workforce when I look at it. Mm-hmm. You know, from an NSA perspective, we have 966 PhDs as of about a week and a half ago, over 1,000 mathematicians, over 4,000 computer scientists. And when we tell them, you're not accepted, we need to keep you at home for a while, their whole purpose in life, and I heard Mike Rogers and Chairman Rogers and Vice Chairman Rubersberger talking a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you think about what these people take an oath to do is to protect and defend this country and our civil liberties and privacy. And we're telling them to stay at home. How do you get good talent to come into government when we treat them like that? So that's the first part. We did ensure that the most critical terrorist-related missions went on, and those to protect life and limb. But reading the rules in the law and making sure we do this exactly right, and we do follow the rules in the law in all cases, what you find out is it's really impacts the morale and welfare of the folks. And when you think about some of these young folks that you bring on, you're telling them, well, I can't pay you for the week that you were on furlough. That will come later. Many of you remember being young last year, and for me, and when you think about it, we live paycheck to paycheck, and that's what they do. And we're making it hard for them to stay with the government, and that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong.
Sure. You know, there's the shutdown, and then there's Snowden. And I feel like we can't have a conversation about cybersecurity and information sharing unless we delve into both of those sorts of things. So
shut down Snowden?
Shut down Snowden.
I'm with you on this.
Two different things. So when it comes to Snowden, though, you know, I attended a cybersecurity event with you earlier this month where you talked a lot about information sharing, even in the context of Snowden. You urged industry to help spread the word about the importance of these programs to exchange information with the federal government. Have you found, though, it's a harder sell on information sharing on Capitol Hill? And what can be done to help restore the trust? You know, lots of questions about confidence builders we got from Chairman Rogers. How's the sell been? How do you fix the trust problem?
Well, I think you got to start out with the facts. And this is where, and the main reason for me coming here, we need the facts on the table so that we can make informed decisions about our future in defending our nation and protecting our civil liberties and privacy. Let me give you a couple cases in point. We actually had a discussion with a senior CEO over the last few weeks, and he guessed about what we did with the program and found out that's entirely wrong. What we're authorized to do with the business record FISA, or Section 215, is to get from the phone companies information about phone calls, your number, the number it called, the date, time group, and the duration, period. There is no name, there is no content, there is no email, there is no phone conversation. The from number, and what we're authorized to do, and only what we're authorized to do, is when we have reasonable articulable suspicion that a Al-Qaeda or related terrorist group is calling into the country, as they did in 9/11, or prior to 9/11, that we can look into that data set and ask the question, is there somebody calling into the country that the FBI should know about, that NSA as a foreign intelligence agency can see, help them understand the threat, and then pass it to the FBI, where if they need to go into it, they can get the probable cause warrant and take it up. In 2012, we approved 288 numbers to search into that database with. That's it. So the facts have been greatly sensationalized and inflamed, not informed. So step one, we need to inform the debate. And you're right, absolutely right, because as we go into this, if people are that far off on this program, where will we go in cyber? And it's much more difficult to understand for many of the people who help write the laws. And this is where you can be of great help. Put the facts out, understand those facts, get those out to the American people. We're a foreign intelligence agency. We see things with our time in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world, threats that originate overseas that are coming into this country. Ours is a noble cause. Our job is to defend this nation and to protect our civil liberties and privacy. It's not either or. We have to do both. And I would tell you that those of you who would take the time to look at the oversight and compliance, the roles of the court, the roles of Congress, administration officials, and our own, that oversight and compliance regimen that we have is better than any other country in the world in protecting our civil liberties and privacy and that of foreign citizens. You know, it's interesting when you look at some of the willful and knowing compliance issues that we have where we held people accountable, the majority, the vast majority, were on foreign people. If you do it wrong, you do it wrong, period. Our job is to do it right, and we hold the people accountable for that.
Sure. Still, General Alexander, there's plenty of conversation on Capitol Hill about restricting the NSA's authorities in this realm. The one big debate, one of the big debates to emerge has to do with restricting the agency's ability to collect bulk call records. What are your thoughts about this? We've heard Senator Patrick Leahy call for this sort of thing. Others on the Hill have not. What do you think about making that sort of change, or what changes might you be open to?
Well, this is going to be a political and a policy decision. Having said that, I'll give you my thoughts. And this is always dangerous. I can see some of my staff going, uh-oh. But I figured you asked a question and you're due a good answer in this. I believe it's in our nation's best interest to put all this phone data into a repository that you, the American people, know what we're doing is right with it. That you have confidence that the oversight, compliance, and the ways that we look at it, the auditing and the controls, is exactly right. That's step one. To ensure we don't have another 9/11. You know, all of us here are old enough to remember 9/11. And we made a commitment at 9/11 that would never happen again. And one of the reasons it happened is because we didn't have a database like this. We didn't have a repository that would allow us to connect the dots. The intelligence community was found lacking by the 9/11 Commission. We came up with the tools that we believe we need to do that. And so I think that's an important tool. I am absolutely open to how we give greater transparency to it. You know, I would love to come up with an idea, and so I'm completely open. If you've got a better idea, put it on the table. That's step one. If you don't, then are the oversight and compliance regimen that we have, is that sufficient? What more could we or should we do? What more on transparency and reporting could and should we do? Where I would be concerned, if we don't know there's a threat, we can't stop it. 9/11 showed us that. Don't put us back to the beginning and have us relearn the rule, the lessons that we learned from 9/11. With the deaths of more Americans. Here's a great statistic. You know, I'm not really good on statistics. Well, maybe a little bit.
That's okay. I can't add. You're fine.
Yeah. In the week ending 23 September, from 16 to 23 September, 972 people were killed in Kenya, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan by terrorists and terrorist-associated things, and over 1,000 wounded. In the past 12 years, from foreign terrorists, 2 people, Los Angeles, 2002. That's not by accident. That's by a lot of hard work overseas by our military and intelligence community, and here by law enforcement with the tools and the capabilities we have. So what I would say is go careful, make sure we do it right. I have 16 grandchildren. I want to see all of them grow up and have a great and wonderful life. And all the people in our country should have that same opportunity. And I am the biggest advocate of the internet. I think we should have privacy and civil liberties there. I think we should manage this. We've got to grow it as we go.
Sure. So just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, and please feel free to correct me here, you'd be more open to changes that might make the process more transparent, but when it comes to the collection and use of that data, that's where you mostly believe the NSA's current authorities should stay intact.
I think the authority should stay intact. I'm open for transparency. I'm open for where we put the data, how we, all the rules that go in. The real issue is where I get uncomfortable, being brutally candid, is, if only the good guys were in the room and there were no terrorists in here, we tell you exactly everything that's going on. And if the terrorists didn't know, then you say, well, that's how they're going to get them. It's a good thing. It's like football, right? You don't let the defense come over and listen to the play. And you say, okay, everybody got the play? Everybody good? But that's what we're doing in terrorists, right? We're saying, you got it? The good guys got it? The bad guys got it. In football, okay, so Army didn't do good this weekend, but next weekend perhaps. In football, you don't do that. Why would we give an advantage to terrorists? And that's the issue. So how do we ensure that the American people know what we're doing is exactly right without letting the terrorists know how to circumvent this? That's the real issue that we face.
Sure. So let's switch this conversation back to cybersecurity. You're dual-hatted as both the leader of the NSA and as the leader of U.S. Cyber Command. With all of these questions that have surfaced about the NSA's authorities and the sort of actions the government would like to take in cyberspace, what do you think is the future of leadership of those two? Should they remain dual-hatted? Do you think that's a good capability to preserve? Or going forward, is that something worth rethinking?
Absolutely. I believe it has to remain dual-hatted. Here's why. Unity of effort. We don't have two internets. And the issue will quickly become who's in charge when. And the answer can't be, we won't tell you what we're doing, you don't tell us what you're doing, we don't have we, they. And I think Secretary Gates, in the decision and the rationale that he put into putting these together, remains true today. He had some great insights from his time over at CIA in the early 90s to his time as the Secretary of Defense. Unity of effort, unity of command and control. Leveraging what we have at NSA, all the technical talent and the access, is absolutely in the best interest of this country. Now, as you stated, I'm eventually will leave this job, knock on wood. Okay.
There you go.
That's close. But, when you think about that, from my perspective, if you try to break them up, what you have is two teams not working together. And what our nation can't afford, especially in this budget environment, is to have the other team, one team, try to rebuild what the other team does. And then fight over resources, fight over who's in charge. And instead of saying, how do we act as a team? The one thing I'm the most proud of these two teams, is when they sit down together, you know what they call themselves? Team Cyber. That's for this country and our allies. They act as a team all the way. And the reason is because we treat them as one team, not two. And that's what our nation needs. Now, we've learned that multiple times, that you can separate them. And what we'll end up doing is like doing an extra lap, when you were bad at track or something. Maybe I might have been once. You have to do an extra lap. We don't want our teams out there doing a lap while the policymakers decide where we should be. So from my perspective, you absolutely need to keep the dual hat arrangement.
Sure. The other question when it comes to structure is whether Cyber Command should be a unified command, whether it should take the next level. And there have always been debates about this on Capitol Hill, it being relatively new compared to everything else at the Pentagon. Talk to us about the future of U.S. Cyber Command and where it should go from here.
I do think it should be a unified command. I think the question is when. When do you do it? When do you take that step? Because the reality is that commander, whoever it will be at that time, is the one who is and has the most insights on this area. Now, I'll be real honest. General Bob Kaler out at STRATCOM is absolutely superb. He's retiring in a couple months, one of the finest military officers in our country today. Absolutely superb gentleman, And the way he operates that, there are no issues between us, no daylight. And I'm thankful that a guy like he is in the job because he lets us do what the nation needs us to do. But that's not always the case. And so what you can't afford is to have Cyber Command responding to the Secretary of the President and then a commander who is not directly in the loop on some of these, who is responsible. So in the Unified Command, he's responsible, but we're executing, but he doesn't know actually what we're doing in all these areas. And so what we've done, and the reason that I would push for Unified Command as we get this up and running along the next couple of years, is because you don't want to hold him accountable for something that guy over there is doing. And that's the real reason for a Unified Command.
Sure. Just a reminder to everybody out there, please tweet us questions. It's at Politico Events. We'd love to ask them for you. But until then,
You took
I'm just
away
gonna
my
keep
iPhone.
going. Oh, yeah?
Oh, I can't tweet.
Yeah, no, you're not allowed to tweet. So you know, you're talking about the future of U.S. Cyber Command, and one of the things that you've discussed pretty extensively, especially on Capitol Hill, has been growing the ranks of so-called cyber warriors, about hiring the new talented folks. But at the same time, repeatedly, House and Senate authorizers and appropriators have raised questions about where one might find and recruit and how one might pay for that talent. Give us a sense of where you all are in attracting these workers and what can be done better to reach out to them.
You know, it's amazing. So many pictures when you say attracting. I have all this breadcrumbs leading up to. Actually, on the NSA side, which can influence under the Cyber Command side, we have a lot of applicants, around 20 to 40,000 for 2,000 jobs. Really high-tech people. Yeah, it's amazing. We put out for a civil liberties and privacy officer. We had 67 people send in their resumes for that. It's amazing. So what do we need to do in this? And this gives you some insights of where we'd need to grow. I think for young people coming into the service, I think, if I was coming back into the service, what would I like to do? Can you imagine coming back into the service and being able to work in cyber? Wouldn't that be great? I mean, just think how wonderful that would be. And so our job is, look, come in, be willing to work, we'll train you, you'll have a commitment, you'll get a tremendous education in cyber, our country will benefit and you'll benefit. And then after 5, 6 years, if you want to stay on, we have great mechanisms. So the military, I think for the cyber force, will have tremendous things. Young kids, and you think about it, I have my grandchildren, a 1-year-old was on an iPad like this. She knows how to go through the iPad, get to Netflix, find the Disney Channel, do all these things. It's amazing. Well, she's almost 2 now. And I think my daughter told me this to show me that girls are smarter than boys. I'm not sure. There's a subtle message here. But this generation is coming up cyber savvy. Tremendous opportunity. We can train them, we can educate them, our nation benefits. Look at all the companies that need this out there. It's good for our nation. And we have the technical foundation and the academic acumen at NSA to help build the knowledge set for these people. It is a great capability that we ought to bring together. So I don't see an issue there, and I'm not getting it from the services that's yet an issue in hiring. I'll tell you, you started out with the shutdown on Snowden.
No, I wasn't going there.
Okay, and the real issue is when you get talent, especially on the civilian side, that can go out where the military has an obligation, civilians don't necessarily have that obligation. If we don't treat them right, they can leave. That hurts our national security. We've got to take care of them.
Sure, but as you said, we can hire them, we can educate them, but then the big question becomes, what do you do with them? And we've heard you talk on the Hill about hiring these cyber offensive teams, stationing them, but not a lot of conversation about what happens from there, what the rules of engagement might be in cyberspace. How has that evolved? Are we ever going to hear a statement from the Pentagon, from the NSA, from Cyber Command about how we envision what cyber offense is?
Nope. No, I'm just kidding. Well, let me give you a couple of examples. Theoretical, if I might. If our nation is attacked in cyberspace, Secretary of Defense Panetta said, that's Defense Department's mission is to defend this country, and that includes in cyberspace. So how do you do that? Well, that gets you to the cyber legislation discussion you had with Chairman Rogers and Congressman Ruppersberger. It gets you into the authorities. Right now, those authorities are defensive in nature. I think that's good and reasonable. What that tells all of you is that any offensive capabilities that we would use in cyber have to be approved specifically by the Secretary of Defense and the President. Civilian leadership and control, I think that's right. What you will get to, I think, as we go down the road is under what conditions do you react to defend, say, Wall Street from a real crisis? That's where we're going to end up at some point. So we have to have the rules in place that you can defend Wall Street from being taken down and inform the civilian leadership, analogous to the way you do nuclear command and control, but at light speed. So think about that. How do you do that? How do you set this up? So those are policy issues and legal issues that we're working through with the administration, with Congress, with everyone. What you would expect from us, a trained and ready force. So train our military and civilians how they should react to defend this country. What are the things that you would reasonably expect them to be able to do? And that's what we would do. We would set up the ability so they know how to operate in that environment. What you wouldn't do is say, you're all infantry. Unfortunately, we're not going to train you on offensive stuff yet until we get into a real war. Then we'll start training you. People are going to look at you and say, well, that's crazy, right? So we have to train them. They have to know the left and right limits. They have to know how to do compliance. They have to know how to protect civil liberties and privacy. They have to know how to act in cyberspace responsibly. And we have to know that they've been accredited to do that. So think of that as licensing. So it's just like a pilot. They've got to prove that what they can do, they can pass the test. We know they're reliable, they're dependable, they're going to do it right. And the offense and defense have to work together because our job is to defend the nation, right? If somebody's attacking this country, things are going to get through. How do you defend the nation in cyberspace? What are the cyber protection teams doing? How do we educate people on future threats? That's why cyber legislation, in my opinion, is so important. We have to be able to talk with industry and get feedback from industry on things like that. Because if we can't see a threat, it goes back to that Edmund Burke. I really like this Edmund Burke, our deputy director, Chris Inglis has this thing up there. It says, all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But if you don't know that something bad is happening, whether it's in terrorism or cyber, you can't act. And if somebody doesn't tell us that they're attacking Wall Street, we can't act until it's too late. Now, we have a great forensics team. If you think about it, you say, wait, what do you mean forensics? Yeah, it's all over. Bad things have happened. We can come down and say, it was really bad. And the guy whose network this was, I know that. Yeah, I said, but no, let me tell you how bad it really was. And we can lay out a laundry list of all the bad things. He said, look, I know it's bad. All my stuff is gone. Yeah, but it's really bad. That doesn't make sense. And so we need that capability. There's another attribute, if I could here. Partnerships, alliances. Cyber is made for alliances. Government to industry, government to government. And we've got to get out in front of that. And I heard some of your comments earlier. Snowden has hurt both within the country, the trust deficit, and with our allies. We have to pick that up and we have to fix that. And that's where industry and the government have to work together. And one of the reasons that I'm here, you can help us get this right.
Sure. Let's take a step back, though. You talked about training and accrediting these folks working with the Pentagon, with U.S. Cyber Command, to find and address these cyber threats in real time. But to what extent do those capabilities need to be made public? I mean, here we find ourselves in this debate over FISA and the Patriot Act and exactly what should be transparent, what needs to be a state secret. When it comes to U.S. Cyber Command and its activities, cyber offense or defense, if you see a physical attack, the response is easy to pinpoint. You can see the physical response. In cybersecurity, it's much different. So to what extent does there need to be greater disclosure, or should there be any?
Well, I think you've put an analogy. Let's take your analogy a step further and then paint that back to cyber. So if you have a missile coming into the United States, everybody agrees a missile coming into the United States, we ought not to see if it's going to hit a military installation or a civilian. If it's going to hit a civilian, say, go ahead. We'd say, no, that's Defense Department responsibility. Stop that missile, please. how about a cyber packet that's going to destroy Wall Street? Now, for you to detect that missile, what are you doing? You know, you have a radar. You have an intelligence system. You know about their missiles. You know about their launch sequence. You know what their infrared signatures look like. You know all this technical data. You know if that warhead is coming, what it probably has in its payload. We don't share that data publicly. And in cyber, it's going to be very similar. What you're going to say is, we're going to know things about the adversary's capabilities that need to be kept secret. But what the American people should know is that when it comes to working with industry, we have to be transparent. You have to know that what industry is sharing with us is not personally identifiable information. It is threat information about somebody trying to attack that they can give back to us and say, this threat signature came from that IP address, was going over there. And it might go to FBI, it might go to DHS, it might go to us, but it should go to all three at once. And then the appropriate agency would take responsibility. If you don't have that capability, you can't act. Now, what should we reveal? There are a lot of pieces of malicious software that are out there that are publicly, and we should put all that out and protect all our systems from it. That takes away much of the spear phishing and spam stuff that they were talking about. 1 out of 3 are successful. Well, actually, it's successful because somebody opened up something they shouldn't. They did something they shouldn't. So educating people, understanding the threat, training people, that's one thing that we can and should do a better job at. But if we know something about an adversary that's very sensitive, we may have to share that with industry and ask them to keep that quiet, treat that as classified. And then if that comes, let us know, because we got a big problem. That's a missile coming our way. Our country needs to know, we need to stop it. And I think the American people and our allies, depending on who's being hit with this, needs to know that we'll do that right. That's where the trust factor has to be built back. Because right now, the way the Snowden thing has been sensationalized and inflamed makes it sound like we're listening to all phone calls and we're reading everybody's emails. That is factually incorrect. 1, it would be impossible, and 2, it would be illegal. So when you look at that, how do we set that right? How do you help us get that word out? Go ahead.
Sure. You know, that though leads to a point that was made by Senator Chambliss earlier today, which is that one of the big hang-ups on the Senate side of information sharing has to deal with what sort of countermeasures are okay for a company to take when given information from the federal government, and the extent to which you should protect them from liability if something were to go wrong. Any thoughts to add on the congressional side of that?
I think that's one of the key issues in this, is where and how far do you go on liability? I'll tell you, from my perspective, if the government gives companies information, so I tell a company, I'm using me as the generic government telling a company, stop this traffic, and I make a mistake, and that government stops it, so you stop it, and the information that was coming in also stops good traffic, and so you now get sued because I did something wrong, you shouldn't be held liable for a mistake the government made. That's where I come down initially. Now, there is issues on the liability, and I think we just have to work, that's where Congress actually has to work that out. What I can do is help them understand from a technical perspective the thoughts on this. And I do think we have to have liability in there. We have to have the information sharing. I do think I think between what Chairman Rogers and Ruppersberger told you and what Senator Chambliss and Feinstein, they're getting closer to this. There are some issues, and I think we have to work those out.
Sure. To take a step back, I'd be remiss not to ask, since you mentioned both Wall Street and countermeasures, the extent to which U.S. Cyber Command, or NSA, got involved in the series of Iranian attacks on U.S. commercial banks. You know, these were attacks on mostly their consumer portals, but any comment on the reports that U.S. Cyber Command wanted to take a pretty aggressive role there in addressing that threat?
Yeah, I think that's blown out of proportion. What we would do, what you would expect us to do, is come up with countermeasures, not just U.S. Cyber Command and NSA, FBI too, all of us. What is it that you would want and expect the government to do? And the answer is create capabilities that could defend Wall Street. Put those up to the policymakers, and they determine when we use them. I am confident that the process works well. And we get our say in that. And from my perspective, they understand both sides. They look at it and they say, okay, this is being handled right. I actually think, you know, it's made out, somebody made it sound like, well, I want to go get A. Nope, all my responsibility is put the options on the table for the policymakers to make a decision with. And I think actually, great people involved in that process. You know, and I've sat in for the last 8 years in discussions like this. And I think really, if the American people could watch those discussions, they would be really heartened by the amount of effort people put into ensuring we come up with the right decision.
Sure. Let's take some questions that were sent to me over Twitter. Somebody had asked, what's the status of the expansion of the Defense Industrial Base Framework Program and the DIB pilot on critical infrastructure?
Well, I think this is one that we've got to continue to expand and provide capabilities back, not only to the defense infrastructure, but to all critical industry. So I would expand it far beyond that. In the defense infrastructure and in the cyber legislation, the issue is, how do we come up with a defensible architecture and framework for our country? And specifically in this case, how does the government share what it knows in a classified methodology with industry? That's where we've got to get to, and we've got to come up with a viable construct. Here's my thoughts on that construct. If you look at the way the internet is framed, the light and how it works, and how it comes into our country, the internet service providers are the ones that actually own and operate the vast majority of the internet, the tier 1 internet service providers. And they do a tremendous job in filtering out distributed denial of service attacks and other bad malware. They would be the first point of defense of seeing something bad going on. So we would share with them stuff. They would come back. They don't need to tell us what was in an email. They just need to tell us, I saw a bad piece of malware going from point A to point B. Share that with the government, and that would include DHS, FBI, NSA, and Cyber Command, all at real time. And then those agencies can take appropriate action. So if you did that, then what we're talking about in the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, and that program is ensuring that everybody benefits from that first level of protection. Now that still means you got to have the right antivirus protection software, you still got to have good network hygiene, you've got to take care of all the basics. But you could set up a framework, and if you think of this technically, that framework would hugely help this country defend itself in cyberspace, and it would help other countries as well. And we ought to share that, and we are sharing that with our allies.
Sure. Well, General Alexander, I think we are almost out of time, so one last question for you here, and that's about, to go back to where we started, the issue of trust. Where do we have to go from here to restore trust in the work that NSA and U.S. Cyber Command is doing, especially as we begin to think anew about new capabilities at Cyber Command, new information sharing, new frameworks to protect critical infrastructure? How do we assuage everyone's concerns across the board, U.S. and international?
We have to start with the facts, plain and simple. You know, I read a lot, you know, there's 2,776 privacy violations. You know, we take a report and we exaggerate, or we don't understand it, and we sensationalize and inflame versus inform. So from my perspective, we need the facts. The American people must know the facts. And I think if they knew the facts about the care that NSA goes to protect our civil liberties and privacy, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And our people do that better than anyone else in the world or any other country in the world, ours and our allies. And we ought to understand what that means. That's the first point. And the second point is this issue about what are you going to do to stop terrorism? You know, the hard part is an intelligence agency whose responsibility is foreign intelligence to defend this country. You know, immediately people say, well, I wonder what they're up to. You know, with the actual, you would really be surprised to see just what you asked us to do. Defend this country, defend our civil liberties and privacy. That's what we're up to. And we take great pride in it. You know, we sent about a little over 6,000 people to Iraq and Afghanistan. After 9/11, we went forward to support our military. That's where we operate foreign space. 22 people, cryptologists, have lost their lives doing that. And they brought back a lot more of our lives because of what they did. You can talk to Dave Petraeus and others, and he will tell you it changed the tide in Iraq because of what these great people did. That's what NSA is. They're the noble ones. And it should be no doubt in our mind that they're the ones that the American people should look up to, not Snowden.
Sure. General Alexander, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the time. I thank you to all of our panelists who have helped us out here today, our partner Raytheon for all of their work, the amazing Politico events team that's running around somewhere here, and thank all of you for coming. We'll see you next time.